It's time for Prove All Things, a Bible discussion program on the Word of God. A panel of preachers will deal with your questions and comments. Prove all things, hold fast that which is good, abstain from all appearance of evil, and the very God of peace sanctify you wholly. Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Engineer Dave tells me we're on the air. And we're glad to have you with us tonight. At least we hope that you're out there with us. This is Prove All Things. And this is our 394th program. Is that right, Dave?
That's correct.
Is that kind of right?
You got it right.
And we're looking forward to talking with you. Everybody knows how it works, I think. If you've listened to us before, we're on YouTube and Facebook. You can comment on any of those. Just comment away or question away or put something to us today, as long as it's concerning biblical topics, religious topics. And it'd be nice if you liked us on Facebook or shared the thing or subscribed on YouTube and so on. This program is brought to you by the High School Road Church of Christ, 3103 North High School Road, over on the west side of the city of Indianapolis. If you're familiar with Indianapolis, it's sort of near the Indianapolis 500 track. You can also call us at 317-257-3000. We'll get you on the air. Your dulcet tones on the air. Speaking of dulcet tones, my guest on the program today is Santa Claus, Jeff Asher. How are you, Jeff?
Ho, ho, ho.
What's with
No
this?
shave November.
I remember you as a younger man. You didn't have a beard. What happened?
Well, I got old, I got fat, and I got lazy.
You didn't want to shave? Is that it?
I have never liked shaving.
Have you given up bathing too?
No, not yet.
No.
I still like to bathe. I like to smell sweet.
Okay. How's things going down there in the piney woods of Texas and
It's still
Louisiana?
hot. We're waiting for our first frost.
Huh. Has it been, what, in the 80s today down there?
Yes.
Well,
No way.
you can get out. The football teams can play in the warm and all that sort of thing.
That's not the way that's supposed to be. It's supposed to be cool in November.
All righty. Are they still calling, I know there's a college there, the high school mascot is the Dragons, I think, right?
Yes, that's right.
The Nacogdoches Dragons, and Stephen F. Austin is something, a lumberman or Paul Bunyan or something.
Lumberjacks.
Lumberjacks.
That's because the School of Forestry is there. That was really how Stephen F. Austin started out as School of Forestry.
School of Forestry. They're part of the...
I can't remember right now that rich philanthropist lumber guy. It'll come to me. Anyway, he had a hand in endowing the school.
I declare. And are they part of the University of Texas system now?
They are since earlier this year.
I'll declare. Nacogdoches is the first capital, I think, of Texas, isn't it?
Yes, oldest city.
The oldest city. All right. Turn him up a little bit. Engineer Dave says, let's get him up. There, I can get him up all kinds of places.
That's fine. Speaker's fine.
All right, here we go. I can get this up. There we go. I think that's going. Not a guest, but our other panelist here is Alan McKee.
Good evening, John.
Who is the bishop of the High School Road Church. How are you, sir?
Sometimes I feel like a rook. Or just a pawn.
There you go. How are you doing?
I'm doing fine. had a good day today, and things are going well, and we're just enjoying this fall weather.
Yeah, it got cold today.
It got a
We've
little
had an
cooler.
awfully warm fall up here. I sell some firewood once in a while, and I'm ready for some cold weather so everybody will have the shivers and want to buy firewood. But I don't know if that's the right attitude to have for the poor and the downtrodden who would like to stay warm and not have their heat bill go up for the winter. But anyway, we're looking forward to talking with you. We're going to go to our, we have a bunch of people who've written in comments. We'd rather hear from you live. We will stop talking about whatever we're talking about and deal with you live as soon as somebody tells me you want to talk. This gentleman says, comedian Jim Gaffigan. Do I know him? I think he's redheaded or something. You know what's more important than the truth? Not being in an argument. He was talking about not getting in an argument with his wife in a joking kind of way. But I confess that sometimes it may have been easier if I would have let certain unbiblical comments go with others rather than arguing about comparatively smaller issues, which I saw in a different light. Maybe I could have addressed this later. What about you fellas?
Oh, no.
Yeah. Do you have to get in a conversation and correct everybody when they take a wrong viewpoint on something?
No, I don't think you have to correct everything. I knew some people that were that way before, and I just don't. Matter of fact, I was in a situation yesterday where a fellow was talking about something, and his view was obviously incorrect about the end of the age and so forth, but I was more interested in trying to get him to sit down to have Bible study, than just feel like I had to ram something down his throat.
Yeah.
But so, there's always that reality. I don't think you have to just jump up and down on top of people every time that they say something that's incorrect. But at the same time, you have to be concerned about people advocating false views in a context where they are influencing others.
Uh-huh.
And so, I was thinking about Proverbs 26. Maybe that was what your questioner was talking about, where Solomon says, "Answer not a fool according to his folly, lest thou also be like unto him." And then turn around and says, "Answer a fool according to his folly, lest he be wise in his own conceit." Judgment determines whether or not if you want to get in, if you want to fight that battle at that moment. And,
there you go.
But by the same token, you can take a fellow's logic, answer a fool according to his folly. In other words, turn his argument on him or show where he is in error. So both aspects of that are true.
What about you, Alan?
Sticking with the theme of the book of Proverbs, I'm reminded of the passage that I think it says something like a soft answer turns aside anger.
Yeah.
And I think that one can address error in that way without being in a belligerent way. It doesn't hurt to, it shouldn't hurt to somebody, especially if they have any respect at all for you, to look at somebody who's saying something and said, well, you could easily say, well, that's interesting, but what about, and you could offer a counterpoint.
Yeah.
And maybe get a dialogue started. Jesus did that a lot of times. He would he would, I remember what comes to my mind is Jesus with the woman at the well. And if you recall, she was, I don't know if exactly belligerent was the idea, but she was obviously sarcastic in some ways. She pointed out to Jesus, for example, you Jews don't have any dealings with us Samaritans. And basically was asking him, what are you doing talking to me? Because you guys don't even talk to us. And there's a sense to me of belligerence, of annoyance, of maybe a little disrespect, and and Jesus proceeds to talk to her and tell her, she's pointing out, our Father said we should worship in this mountain. You say we got to do it in Jerusalem. And, Jesus responded to that by turning the whole thing around and giving her a whole different thing to think about. Saying the day's coming when it's not going to matter if you're worshiping in that mountain or in Jerusalem. You're going to worship God wherever you are, and it'll be fine. And it's like, you can imagine she didn't expect that answer back from Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
And so here's Jesus, who responded with a calm, I would say, a calm reply, and got her to thinking. Got her to thinking a little bit, and got her engaged, and get going a little give and take. Sometimes that's what it takes. Sometimes you can really open somebody's eyes with that kind of a give and take.
Yeah. Three things I want to say. Number one, my wife and I have a special shirt that we wear every now and then. And it's got a big badge on the front, and it says Grammar Police. Because every now and then we want to be sure and fix everybody's grammar and make sure that they have the right gerund and they don't leave dangling participles and things like that. And if we actually did that on a consistent basis, I would have to admit that somebody might get a little irritated that, hey, was this really necessary? And so, secondly, I've always been really irritated at my dad, who's deceased now, because there were so many things in the Bible he could have told me about and he didn't tell me. And I've come to be less irritated at him through the years when I realized, you don't have to tell everybody everything you know. There's some things that are important, and you realize they're going astray. They're going to lose their soul if they continue in this direction, and perhaps I need to get that fixed. There are some things in the Bible that I'm willing, there's maybe two opinions can be expressed on the thing, and I'm not so dogmatic that I have to have my opinion and let the other fellow express his, and maybe we'll both get to heaven. And the third thing, which I'm about to forget because I'm old, is, in, where is it, the book of Jude, he says, some save...
pulling them out of the fire.
Pulling them out of the fire. And there's another that you save perhaps a little more calmly and over a period of time. But there's some things that had to be corrected right away, and lest someone just absolutely ruin their life and head in the wrong direction. And I think that's the distinction that has to be made in these things. What do you think? Let me give you another example. I knew a good lady and another here in Indianapolis. She didn't worship at High School Road, but one of our former members was down there. And this former member was having a Bible study with some absolute, with people who weren't familiar with the Church of Christ. They really weren't that familiar with the Bible. And she was just trying to have a nice Bible study, and maybe gently and calmly and over time teach. Well, this lady came, and the desperately important thing she thought they needed to hear was that Christmas wasn't the birthday of Christ. Well, no, it isn't the birthday of Christ. And yes, so many people misuse it. But I'm not sure that's the first thing an alien sinner needs to find out. There's so many other things much more important. And you might not have to drop the whole atomic bomb on them over that subject. There's something to be said for sort of working up to it over time and maybe gently presenting the truth. But she said, my friend who was having the Bible study said it just destroyed their Bible study. Nobody wanted to hear her anymore after that because it was for them, such an extreme viewpoint, and they needed to be, the Lord says that for the time you ought to be teachers, you have need that one teach you again the first principles. Well, what is that? I'm not sure that was necessarily the first principles sort of stuff that everybody needed to hear, and then a little later you could work up to stronger meat. But anyway, what do you think over there, Engineer Dave? What's up?
Nothing.
My goodness, Dave. Get out there and wrestle them around and get them ready to deal with. Or help us out some. Sometimes it's just helping us out. Here's another question. Why do you think that Jesus brought Lazarus back from the dead? Jeff? You do remember that account, right?
I'm turning to it right now.
Why did he do it?
John 11:4. This sickness is not unto death, but for the glory of God, that the Son of God might be glorified thereby.
All right. What's that mean?
That means it was for the glory of God. It was to glorify God. It was to show that Jesus was the Son of God. It was to prove that he was indeed the resurrection and the life. There's no reason to speculate beyond what Jesus said about it.
Well, I think, you're in John 11. I believe it says more, and that points to why Jesus did it.
I see you're going to speculate, but go ahead.
Not too much. Look in John 11, verse 45. Many of the Jews which came to Mary and had seen the things which Jesus did believed on him.
That's what I just said.
Huh?
That's what I just
You read
said.
verse 4. I'm reading verse 4.
I know, but that they might believe he was the Son of God. I said that.
But you didn't read the next verse. Some of them went their ways to the Pharisees and told them what things Jesus had done.
That's the ones who didn't believe.
And then gathered the chief priests and the Pharisees a council and said, What do we? For this man doeth many miracles. I think that one of the reasons he did it was to goad. It was time for him to die. He knew that. The Passover was coming. He was, and I think he did that in 2 or 3 of his parables at this period of time. He was goading the Jews. You go over into chapter 12 as it speaks about it. And in verse 1, Jesus 6 days before the Passover came to Bethany, where Lazarus was, which had been dead, whom he raised from the dead. And so many of these people were there to see Lazarus. They had come to see Lazarus, who was raised from the dead. They didn't come just to see Jesus. They wanted to see Lazarus. For instance, in verse 9, much people of the Jews therefore knew that he was there, and they came not for Jesus' sake only, but that they might see Lazarus also, whom he had raised from the dead. And I think he was goading them. It says the chief priests consulted that they might put Lazarus also to death. I think if you look at the parables Jesus spoke during this week, and especially that final one, most of the commentators say that that was absolutely the straw that broke the Jewish officials' back.
Yeah.
Was that parable of the laborers in the vineyard, or parable of the I don't know what they called it, but anyway, where the laborers in the vineyard had refused the rent to the governors, and finally the son was sent to them to collect the rent, and they had killed him and tried to take control themselves. And it was such a pointed parable. It just didn't need any interpretation, and the Jews knew he was aiming it right at them, that I think he was preparing them for the decision to kill him. That I think that's one of the reasons. Otherwise, he loved Lazarus, but there were a lot of people he loved undoubtedly that died. So I think it was to convince people to believe on him, and I think that it was to goad the Pharisees. They were either going to believe on him or they were going to kill him. Make the choice. What do you think, Alan?
I also thought too, though, that this was just sort of a preview, a little bit a preview, demonstrating his power over death.
Okay.
In raising Lazarus from the dead, he demonstrated. He had demonstrated throughout his command over illness, his command over demons, his command even over the weather, and things like that. There's yet one enemy that he's got to show. I can beat that enemy too, and that was death.
Absolutely. All right. I didn't speculate too much, did I, Jeff?
Okay.
I love having Jeff
The question
on.
was about Lazarus. The
Question was about what?
Lazarus.
Yeah. What do you mean? Why did he pick out Lazarus?
Why did he raise Lazarus?
Yes.
That's he said why he raised him.
Yeah.
And he might be glorified.
Well, all of that in when he speaks of his glorification throughout John there, usually is talking about his death and resurrection. If you look at, somebody talk a minute and I'll look up several of the passages that talk about it. I don't hear you talking.
Well,
Go
there's
ahead.
no point in beating this horse to death. Let's answer another question.
Oh, hang on just a second. I'm just goofy that way.
I know you want to be right.
No, I don't want to be right, but I think he talks about it where he says, for instance, in John 12, we saw John 11, and in John 12:28, he says, there came a voice where he says, the hour has come, in verse 23, that the Son of Man should be glorified. Well, he's talking about his death and resurrection. Then there came a voice from heaven saying, I both glorified it and will glorify it. And then
Same thing in John 17:4-5.
Go ahead. Here, well, I've got him here.
No,
I've glorified thee on earth. I've finished the work which thou gavest me to do. And all mine are thine, and thine are mine, and I am glorified in them. So, I think he was speaking not of Lazarus' resurrection, but he was speaking of the fact that he's, I guess, previewing it. That might be, I think that's the word you used.
Yes.
Previewing the idea of his own death and resurrection, that he had power over death. Anyway, Let me see. Okay, let me go on. How we doing, Engineer Dave?
Eric says hello from Kentucky.
Hello, Eric. I know two Erics in Kentucky. No, one of them's in Ohio. I almost got there. This gentleman
This
says,
one must be your cousin.
what?
This one must be your cousin.
He is a, let me think. I don't know. I never know beyond that. He is the son of a second cousin. What
Son
is
of a
it?
second cousin. Okay, your second cousin?
Yes.
Well, he's your second cousin once removed.
There you go. Hello, Eric. I usually have to get out that they got it. You can get a sheet showing all those relationships. I am struck by the kind of tears, the weeping, and the sorrow that Jesus expressed on his way to call his friend Lazarus back from the grave. I think it is a true sign of his humanity and godliness working together. Who were his tears for during this open show of emotion? Are the tears the show of his humanity or what?
Yeah, I think so.
Well, to say they were literal tears, so yes.
Okay.
Because God doesn't have tear ducts.
Well, I don't think so.
I mean, we're talking about an anthropomorphism. God is said to be grieved and all of those things, but as far as weeping, I mean, verse 36 says, then the Jews said, behold how he loved him. Of course, loving is not a purely human emotion, but they determined that because Jesus wept. And they didn't, and they said, could not this man, which opened the eyes of the blind, have caused that even this man should not have died? So, I mean, they recognize his humanity. You know, that's one thing that always I try to tell people. So there was never any debate about Jesus whether or not he was a man in the first century. The debate was whether or not he was the Son of God.
Yeah. Well, you know, on other occasions where he raised the dead, I'm thinking the widow Nain's son, the Bible says he had compassion, which would perhaps imply the idea of...
Well, in Luke 7, there's such great detail about the fact that she was, or he was her only son. He was her source of soul support. So it's obvious that the compassion of Christ is what's being considered there.
There you go. You were going to say something, Alan?
Yeah, that it did show his humanity. Who were his tears for? I think it was for the ones that were weeping, the ones that were sorrowing. For, Lazarus was dead, and we recognize that weeping, we can weep in sorrow for someone who's died. We can also be moved by emotion by those who are around us weeping, and we feel that sorrow. We share that sorrow with them. We know they're in anguish because someone dear to them has gone. And even if you didn't know, have you ever gone to a funeral where you didn't know the person? But
yes, I've preached funerals.
All right.
I didn't know.
Yeah. Well, you go to a funeral and you don't know the person, but you see the family there. You see, some wife weeping. You see children sobbing, and it tugs the heartstrings.
Verse 33 there, when Jesus therefore saw her weeping on Mount Mary, and the Jews also weeping which came with her, he groaned in spirit. He groaned in his spirit when he saw those things. and was troubled. And that's a human emotion that is not a divine emotion.
A couple of passages, because I'm going to look at the other half of this. The implication is that God doesn't weep, which I think would be an anthropomorphism if to speak of it. But there are some passages that imply that, for instance, Genesis 6 and verse 6, where it says where God's so disappointed with mankind. He says in verse 3, "My spirit shall not always strive with man, for he also is flesh, yet his days shall be 120 years." But then in verse 6, it says, "It repented the Lord that he had made man on the earth, and it grieved him at his heart." So here's the Bible talking about. Now, I'll admit that this emotion may be let's see, what is it? It's not anthropomorphic. It is. There's another word for that implies that it's an emotional. It's an emotion of mankind spoken of as God having it. But at least it's the idea of a sense of regret, repentance. If I were grieving, there would be tears and sadness. And you have the same thing in the New Testament. And if I can get there. Oh, come on. Computer. It's going to fight me. I'm going to get there. That's ridiculous. Come on, give it to me. Here it is. This is in Ephesians 4 and verse 30, where he says, "Grieve not the Holy Spirit of God, whereby you are..." Now, I know that word. Where you're sealed unto the day of redemption. There's anthropomorphic, where God is spoken of as having body parts similar to a man. There's also anthropopathetic, where God is spoken of as having emotions similar to a man. And so when you say God doesn't weep, whatever that anthropopathetic application is, God does grieve. So Jesus was grieving. Now, which part of him was grieving? He obviously was grieving as a man, and he may well have, God may have been grieving too during that period of time. I think he is compassionate and loves us, and has tried to show in sending Jesus that he cares about us. So he loves us. That's an anthropomorphism, or anthropopathetic too, in the emotional element of love. I'm babbling on. Come on, help me out, guys.
I got you one.
You're doing great.
Gerald says on Facebook, "I don't think his tears were just for Lazarus, but knowing what his disciples and others were about to face. Jesus had compassion and sorrow for them."
That's in his tears, not just for Lazarus. He says he thinks it's for the others. He had seen his sisters weeping. I think he had seen what death means to us. And I think that's maybe a good point that you're making. He'd come to overcome death. And he knew what a misery it was to us, what a grief it was to us. And therefore his weeping may have been for not just Lazarus, not just his sisters, but for every other element of those who were going to undergo
Well,
this.
I make the point, let's see there. He groaned in spirit 33. And again, groaning in himself. That's verse 38. And I'm trying to remember. what that word is. Let's see there.
Where is it? John 11:38?
Yeah, yeah. It's the word in verse 38, groaning, is to snort with anger. And there's your point right there that you're making about Jesus was angry about death. Here was the best friend that he had, someone who was very precious and dear to him. He sees his sisters weeping as they are, and how the Jews who loved him are weeping, and it just angers Jesus, the whole necessity of death, which is what he came to undo. Only God could conceive of defeating death with death. And so Christ is here, and if you want to speculate, here's a speculation, but this scenario here for the glorification of God, you were talking about, well, it was intended to prick the Jews, and well, may it have been, and I suggested that it specifically stated it was for the glorification of God. But if you want to talk about it, we see Jesus not long after this praying in the garden, "Let this cup pass from me." Well, this scene here would have steeled his heart against any, and people always, because they can't accept the humanity of Christ, they get all upset when you say something like this. But the fact that Jesus is not going to renege on what he came to do. That's what the devil has been trying to do, to discourage him from the very moment the first temptation came out that's recorded in the New Testament. Bow down to me and I'll give you all of these kingdoms of the earth. Jesus, take the shortcut. I'll give you the world. That's what you came for, the world. I'll give you the world if you'll just bow down to me. Of course, the devil's deception is just that. And Jesus is wise enough to see through that. But the point I'm trying to make here is that the temptations of Christ were real. The emotions of his heart were real. The compassion that he felt was real. And when Jesus knelt down in the garden and said, "Father, let this cup pass from me," I genuinely believe that was a real sentiment on his part. But at the same time, he knew in his heart what had to be done and that he was the only one that could do it. And so you have here this scene where he calls Lazarus back because he knows how, I may not be expressing this as well as I want to, but he knows why he's there. It's not Lazarus' fault. It's not anybody's fault but the devil's fault. It's sin. That's the problem. That's why he's out there at this graveside. It's because sin is in the world. And he came to fix that.
Yeah. You mentioned that. I quickly looked up that word. That's a good point about it. He says that it is to roar. This is a complete word study dictionary. To roar, storm with anger, blame, admonish, charge strictly, threaten word. Indignantly, yeah, and then an agitation of mind, and that's the grief that it uses. And it's used twice there in John 11. Go ahead, Engineer Dave.
Comment from Gerald on Facebook, who says, this is speculative. If the Jews were to kill Lazarus, kill him again, after being brought back, would Jesus have raised him again?
I don't know.
I'm not going to speculate.
That's speculative. Lazarus did die again. He had not been raised to die no more. So either that or there's some guy walking around somewhere named Lazarus. But I don't know. That's just total speculation. Alan probably knows. Would he have raised him again?
I think it's just. I think we can endlessly speculate about what Jesus might have done under any number of circumstances. You know, if we were of a mind to do so. The point is, he raised Lazarus from the dead. He did it as a demonstration of his power, as proof of his power over death. And you know, the Bible talks about Satan having the power of death, and Jesus wanted to show his absolute mastery over Satan. And you know, raising Lazarus one time was sufficient. Raising Lazarus, you're going to raise Lazarus, I guess, a dozen times. Okay. What have you proven? You know, you got poor Lazarus like a jack in the box, you know, bouncing out of that tomb every couple of days.
There's an interesting point, though, to be made on Jesus' miracles of raising the dead. You have instances of Jesus where he raised them just almost right after they died. Jairus' daughter, for one, or the centurion's servant. I mean, they just barely cold. And then you have him raising the widow of Nain's son on the way to the cemetery. And then you have him raising Lazarus. And I love the whole story here because it's just such a word picture. But you have it said roll away the stone, and Martha says, "But Lord, he stinks. He's been dead for 4 days." You know? And then somebody asked me one time, "So why did Jesus say Lazarus come forth?" I said, "Well, you obviously don't know how the Jews buried, because they bury their whole family in there. I mean, he wasn't probably very unlikely to be the only body in there.
He didn't want everybody walking out.
Yeah, if he just said, 'Come forth,' they'd all come. But Lazarus come forth. But then, how does Lazarus come? Jesus says, 'Loose him.' Can't you see this grown man hopping to the door of this with his hands lashed down to his side and his feet bound together? I mean, that's how the Jews buried. Look there in Acts chapter 5 when it says that when Ananias fell down dead, that the young men came and wound him up.
Yeah.
That's how they did it. They wound, and no shroud of Turin. They started at the ankles and they wound him up all the way to the chest, and then they started at the hands and wound them up to the shoulders. And so it's an incredible miracle that Jesus didn't just raise some that were kind of dead.
He was really dead.
Pretty surely dead. Just kind of like the old witch, you know. She's sincerely dead.
Yeah. Well, you know, it is obvious in John 11 because he waited. He did that on purpose.
Yes.
He waited till he was really dead.
Yeah, he made sure that everybody knew this fellow was dead.
You know, you were talking about what if he raised him again, that really show it. You know, I've always appreciated the second Psalm, which is quoted, 2-3 times in the book of Acts.
Oh, yeah.
Why do the heathen rage and the people imagine a vain thing? You know it. I'm not going to read it all to you. He says that let us, you know, the kings of the earth are going to say, let us break their bands asunder and cast away their cords from us. But then, to me, this has always been funny. Or the way Jesus said it, he that sitteth in the heavens shall laugh. The Lord shall have them in derision. Then shall he speak unto them in his wrath and vex them in his sore displeasure. Yet have I set my... How many times did he have to do that? One was enough. Yet have I set my king on my holy hill of Zion. You know, we just went through an election, and I don't want to apply this illustration too much to this election because in the it would apply to any election. But you have this hard fought election where they're fussing at one another and saying the other man doesn't have any sense and so forth on either side. But there is that elation once, hey, I won. That's what Psalms 2 is about. It said, you thought you were going to put an end to him, yet have I set my king on my holy hill of Zion. Yeah. In spite of everything you could do, I managed it. Yeah. Okay, Engineer Dave, what do we got? I heard the phone ringing. Was that somebody selling soap powders? I'll hang up. Do we have anything else over there?
That was the wrong line.
Okay. All right, that was a good question. Let's go to a couple of other questions. This fella's... Okay, this had to be an interesting sermon this fella writes about. He says, I have a sermon titled People with Big Butts, 1T. What do you think are the three biggest butts from those who are almost persuaded to become Christians? Alan, you hadn't been talking enough. What are the reservations? What are the three biggest reservations?
Well, the one that I always find curious and irritating to me is, well, I'd be a Christian, but that would imply that my parents, and I know you've got that same idea. That means my parents or my grandparents or my, some dear person is condemned.
Yeah.
And I don't want to take on that point of view.
We laugh about that here in my office. I mentioned earlier, every now and then I sell some firewood. And my girls that sell the firewood, somebody will call them and I want to know the price and is it dry and does it burn well and blah, blah, blah. And how much does it cost to have it delivered and so forth. And you give them the price and say, well, and we always used to refer to them, said they're going to have to go and ask their mother. I'll call back. It's just, just the most juvenile thing imaginable. What you mean is you're going to see if you get it cheaper somewhere. But yes, those people who it would be saying my mama and my daddy were wrong. Mm-hmm. Well, my wife and I have been talking about our will, so to speak, and she says, well, but what about this and that and the other? And I said, look, honey, she said, what's going to happen if they do this or that, or this codicil or that codicil? I said, let me see if I can explain. We'll be dead, and it won't matter to us at all what they do. It's up to our children, Dave.
I don't know what you're talking about.
Yeah. Well, he said three. You gave me one. What about it, Jeff? You got another one?
The one that I immediately comes to mind is, but the thief on the cross wasn't baptized, or Abraham wasn't baptized, or, just on down the list. And you're staring at Mark 16, 15, and 16 right there on the page, or Acts 2:38, or 1 Peter 3:21. But, and so anything to try and avoid water baptism.
Let me find a loophole here.
Yeah.
But there's a loophole.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. This is not a government policy. It's scripture.
I suppose the but I think is we're coming up with three. Is the one where they know a sin, they're committing a sin, and they say, "But I would have to give up. Maybe I shouldn't be with the wife that I have right now." Or I'd have to give up my drinking, or I'd maybe have to quit my job. We used to have here in Indianapolis, there was Oh, an X-rated movie theater. And boy, it was pretty raw. X-rated. It was, I think it was beyond X, whatever X. It was a Y and Z theater. And the fellow who owned it became a Christian. He became a Christian. And he closed the thing down. Instead of saying, but, I'm going to destroy my business and my livelihood, he closed it down. But so many people, they're not going to do that if that affects their situation very much in life. I know in Louisville, I don't know whether it's still this way in Louisville or not, but I remember years ago, Louisville had more breweries in it than you could shake a stick at, mostly beer of this kind or that kind. You could go through some parts of town and it smelled like fresh mash on the rise. And there were Christians there in that town that they had a job in those breweries. And that was, for a lot of people, that was a big thing. I've got seniority. I've worked there for years. I'd have to give that up. Well, the harlot would have to quit being a harlot. And the thief would have to quit being a thief. And on and on it goes. So, you think about the doctor who's you're talking to about becoming a Christian, and he's been performing abortions. Maybe that's a big part of his income. You going to keep doing that? But he's going to realize, my goodness, if I become a Christian, I'm going to have to give up on that. So anyway, that's a third example. I think those other two are dandies, but that's a third example you might consider. Any you want to add to it, Jeff?
No, that's a big enough butt.
Okay. Okay, people with big butts. The ladies at church would shoot me if I came up with that title for a sermon.
I fixed it to say there'd be a lot of us in trouble.
I remember.
We're probably already in trouble for having answered the question.
Yes. Well, I remember Jimmy Tootin. You remember Jimmy Tootin?
Oh, yeah.
I stole one of his sermons one time where he had a good sermon about the king's ass. Boy, the ladies sort of thought, hey, that's over the line there. But it's, of course, had a biblical passage attached to it. Okay. Oh, my goodness. How much time we got? We are not going to have enough time on this one. But anyway, what does the Bible say about dinosaurs? Are there dinosaurs in the Bible? And he lists some passages. What does the Bible say about dinosaurs, Jeff? We'll look at the passages probably next week.
Okay. I'm not exactly sure. I know that there are some brethren who see those passages and say that they are referring to dinosaurs. I do think they're there by necessary implication. I don't deny that dinosaurs existed. I have a friend who does, but I don't do that. I think the evidence is that they died in the flood. There's present day evidence for that. But are there specific references to dinosaurs? Maybe, maybe not.
Yeah, one of his passages is Job 40. We'll look at that.
Mm-hmm.
Job 40 and verse 17. It says, well, I'm going to have to go back. Verse 14. Then will I also confess unto thee that thou knowest. Behold now, behemoth, which I have made with thee, he eateth grass as an ox. Lo, how it's now his strength is in his loins, his force is in the navel of his belly. He moveth his tail like a cedar. Sinews of his stones are wrapped up. It's Ethan. His bones are as strong pieces of brass. His bones are like bars of iron. He's the chief of the ways of God. He that made him can make his sword. He is the chief of the ways of God. He that made him can make his sword to approach unto him. Surely the mountains bring him forth food where all the beasts of the field play. Is that talking about the dinosaur?
Well, I think you could make a case for it, but I'm not sure that that's what it's talking about.
All right.
I'd have to go back and look at it. That's Job 40.
Job 40. He's got another reference in Job 41 in verse 33. Let me go over there. He's got some.
You've got two words. You got two words in the Old Testament. You got Leviathan, and you've got Behemoth. And depending on which commentary you're looking at, I mean, some look at the description and say, well, that's a crocodile, or that's a hippopotamus. You know. Then others say, well, it's allosaur, or it's whatever the name of that, Plesiosaurus, I think it is the name of that sea monster. So I don't know. I don't know that it's important that I find a specific reference to a dinosaur, or what we would call a dinosaur. I mean, a crocodile is a dinosaur as far as I'm concerned. They've been around unchanged for millennia. A coelacanth is another one that's been around unchanged. It's clearly they've found fossils that are thousands of years old. They look like men, just like they do now. But there are other species that are extinct. So do I have to find a specific reference to them in the Old Testament or the New Testament to be able to say that they existed? No.
What do you think, Alan?
And then the other thing is Job. The problem with Job, if you put it in the context of the time it's written, this is where I come from. You've got dinosaurs living after the flood, and I'm not sure that that's a tenable position.
All right. What do you think, Alan?
I'm of a mind to agree with Jeff. I think a case can be made that that's a description of some kind of large animal, and certainly there are large animals that existed supposedly a long time ago that kind of fit that description. But is that definitive proof? Not necessarily. I don't think so. I think there's plenty of argument. There's plenty of argument that could be made that there were large animals around. There were large animals around of a type maybe we don't have today, and we somehow think in a little bit of arrogance that we are, that we know it all.
Yeah.
And I think that's a fair amount of arrogance on our part.
All righty, Jeff, you're preaching over in
Haynesville,
Louisiana. When and where?
Haynesville, Louisiana, 4199
East Alternate 2, right off the main drag on what used to be called Sherman Street. And be there Sunday morning at 9:30 for our Bible study. We're going to finish up with the Egyptian bondage and talk about Pharaoh's heart being hardened. And then I'm going to preach on 1 Peter chapter 4 on Sunday night. And I haven't made up my mind yet what I'm going to preach on Sunday morning because I just finished a series on the model prayer.
All righty. High School Road Church, 3103 North High School Road here in Indianapolis, is going to meet tomorrow night. We'll have a Bible study tomorrow night. Our adult class is going to study in Matthew 13, maybe go into 14 tomorrow night. And Sunday morning, Alan McKee teaches our adult class, and he is studying in Hebrews, the 3rd to 4th chapter.
That's correct.
And then at 10:30, we'll have a worship service. And then we'll have another service at 6 in the evening, 3103 North High School Road. We'd love to have you come be with us. We'll probably revisit this question next week. We sort of barely scratched the surface of it. If the Lord wills, we'll be back with you next week. Good evening to you.